Hello, my name is Risa Matsumura. I am a cultural anthropology and sociology major. I recently graduated in May, and I am part of the Disability Resource Center Speakers Bureau. I am a brain cancer survivor, and my disabilities include learning disabilities, reading comprehension issues, short term and long term memory loss, and then I have a visual field defect in both my eyes. And some of the topics that I would like to talk about and that I would want faculty and staff to know, and my first one is person first language. I Up to the age of 18, I did not have disabilities, and so I was never familiar with person first language and what was offensive and what wasn't. But having been at UGA, I'm realizing more and more that person first language is really, really empowering, especially if, like, the dean, the professors, and even just like faculty and staff are using person first language. It really sets the standard for not only other professors but also students to see in people with disabilities as people first and not disabled people. So I think that as a student body entirely, I think, or even just society, using person first language can be really, really helpful, and even just like changing your perspective to see human beings as human beings, like seeing them as people first and their accommodations as just being a part of who they are. Another topic that I would like to talk about is just because two students have this same diagnosis doesn't mean that their accommodations are the same. So, for example, ADD or ADHD, people tend to clump them all in one group, and that can be really harmful because we don't see each student as an individuals. We're kind of just putting them all in one group and saying that, oh, everyone with ADD don't like this, they do this, their triggers are this. And so I think it can be easy to clump people together, but in those moments where you feel like you are already putting in these stereotypes in your head, those are like really great opportunities. Obviously, being mindful and aware of the environment, but like asking questions is a really good way to like distinguish each individual based on their own experiences. Another one, and something that was like the most challenging during my past 4 years at UGA, is facial expressions. As someone who has a really hard time getting everything that's up here out of my mouth in a very fluid way, when people have like this like confused facial expression, or when they look like what I'm saying doesn't make sense at all, it's really discouraging towards me, because like speaking and learning is very, very challenging for me. And so when people's facial expression has this expression of like, what you're saying doesn't make sense, like I don't really know what you're saying, it just completely like shuts me out and makes me not want to speak at all. So even like the little things of, nodding and just having like a very like neutral face can really make a difference in in the way that the person that you're talking to is feeling. And then I also want to talk about two misconceptions that I experienced at UGA. One of them is because of the location of where my brain tumor was. Whenever I have migraines, my entire body just gets really, really fatigued and I can't move. Looking at any electronics really just makes my head like pretty much feel like it's exploding. And so oftentimes I will call my sister back home and have her log into my email and send an email to my professors stating that I have a really bad migraine and I'm not able to come to class. But there have been multiple times where I have emailed my professor and I was penalized for not being there, when really it wasn't like my fault that I had a migraine and that I couldn't come to class. And so a common misconception that students even or professors have is that people with disabilities like have it easy because they can just like not come to class whenever they decide to. But often most students with disabilities are not taking advantage of their accommodations, and when they miss class, it's because of a medical reason. Another issue that I've had is because I have a hard time understanding the material, I'll meet with a TA and then it just like won't make sense because I think the like learning tactics is just not connecting well with the way that my brain operates. And so I'll meet with a TA and I still won't understand it. And so I'll email my professor and say, do you mind if I come to your office hours? And then for multiple times, I've been told by my professors that just go meet with the TA. I don't have time. You should be able to understand the material. And it's kind of discouraging because it's not so much that the material is hard, it's just the way that I'm learning or the way that it's being taught is really hard for me to absorb. And so when a professor kind of shoos me off, it makes me feel like I should just learn it on my own and that the professor's not really there to help and they're just more there to just like teach the material and hope that everyone understands it. Um, so I guess one of the but the misconception with that is when a student really does want to meet with a professor, especially if they have a disability, it's usually because the TA it wasn't like able to get resolved through a TA and that they needed to actually talk to the professor, which is the person who is oftentimes in charge of all the material that is being taught. And then lastly, my suggestions is when we are renovating buildings on campus, which seems like it's, pretty ongoing over the past 4 years, really making sure that the campus is accessible for people with all sorts of disabilities. And a perfect example for that is the new Jumbotron, making sure that there's closed captions at all times because for a university that really emphasizes on diversity and one of our pillars being justice, I don't think it's acceptable or it's very unacceptable for us not to make sure that even something as big as football games is accommodating for people with disabilities, making sure that there's a clear walkway for people in power chairs or wheelchairs, and then making sure that people with hearing aids are actually able to experience that college game, football game. I think is really, really important. Um, Potentially involving more students in conferences. Obviously, that comes with confidential information. There's probably a reason why students aren't involved, but even just having a panel with the university president, so with Jerry Moorhead, and then like even just having a panel with students with disabilities and making sure that we are being inclusive, especially with something like disabilities. And granted, a lot of areas of campus can argue that they also deserve, they also should be involved in these meetings, but I just feel that it would be very helpful to have more students involved in conferences or even just in teacher meetings or department meetings, just to make sure that all areas of campus is accommodating. Another one that I wish coming into the university, I wish that the DRC made more of an appearance at orientation. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the Department of Student Affairs and how orientation is managed. But I think it's really unacceptable that a lot of students at UGA, which a lot of my peers, they didn't know about the Disability Resource Center until their senior year, and that's solely because it just wasn't presented to them or to their parents during orientation. And granted, a lot of that is up to them, up to the student to find those resources. But with something with disabilities, I really think that it should be part of orientation, or at least incoming students should be aware that the Disability Resource Center exists, or even just making it part of making sure we're talking to the visitor center and making sure that whenever they do tours, oftentimes those tours involve their parents, and so just even giving a quick spiel about the Disability Resource Center, I think would be a really great way to make the university more inclusive from the beginning, and not when someone's a senior and then they realize that it's too late to get accommodations. And then even just in general, I think every faculty and staff member should familiarize themselves with the Disability Resource Center. They obviously don't have to know everything about it, but familiarizing themselves with where it is, getting a tour, knowing what resources are available, and then also just getting familiar with at least one coordinator at the Disability Resource Center, so that if anything ever does come up, the coordinators know the students the most. And so utilizing those resources to making sure that if anything does happen, you can immediately send a student or a parent or another faculty member straight to the Disability Resource Center. And I think that would be a really good way to bridge the gap between faculty and staff and students. And then one just like personal experience during my senior year that was really like not like life altering, but it really changed the way that I viewed UGA. Was I couldn't take pop quizzes in the class because of my accommodations to receive extra time on all exams and quizzes and stuff. One of my professors completely called me out, and she said, "We're no longer going to have quizzes in this class due to a student in here who's had brain surgery, and her accommodations just don't align with that, and therefore you guys will not have pop quizzes, but as a result you will have more reading quizzes." And that was really discouraging and also embarrassing because most of the class knew I was the only one that had a brain tumor. Um, and I have no hard feelings towards her, and I've actually am very, very close with her, but I also think that professors especially need to be aware of like how to accommodate to students and making sure that they don't call students out like that. Like I feel like it's like a sense of professionalism. So I met with her afterwards, and I talked to her about ways that she could avoid doing that in the future, because I would hate for another student who wouldn't be able to speak up for themselves to experience that and then feel like the University of Georgia is not inclusive, or the University of Georgia is not accommodating, because they are. It's just I don't think the faculty and staff on campus aren't well versed on how to approach a situation like that. So that was just kind of something that really made my experience at UGA different from most other students. And then also, it can be really intimidating and like discouraging to hear all this and to feel like everyone's at fault for not knowing a lot about disabilities. But I think it's okay to ask questions. And obviously, like I said earlier, it's important to be aware of like your surroundings and when you're asking and how you're asking. But asking questions is the best way to learn about people with disabilities. Um, and I think sometimes it'll like slip out of your mouth to say disabled people, or the autistic kid, but just like catching yourself is a start, and we're headed towards the right direction if you're able to catch yourself saying um, discouraging words, or just I guess to say and saying like disabled people. And then also just like no one grows when they're comfortable. Like no one grows when they're comfortable. So asking questions can be really intimidating, especially as a faculty member or a professor, but that is the moments that I think we grow the most. And there's so many like camps on campus and even just in the community, like ESP, Special Olympics, Camp Twin Lakes. And as an adult, I think it's a great opportunity to volunteer, even just for a weekend, and familiarize yourself with people with disabilities. And the more you spend time with them, the more comfortable you become. But again, like I said earlier, it's not anyone's fault for not knowing all the right terms or all the right ways to say things. But I think as a faculty and staff member, it is part of their responsibility to serve as like role models, and to set the standard for other faculty and staff, and then also students. But overall, I just think that faculty and staff should be more familiar with the Disability Resource Center. And then if you learn anything, it's person first language is really important. But overall, I think UGA is making a lot of progress, but I really hope that, 5 years from now when I come back to UGA, the Disability Resource Center is grow. I hope that it's grown, and that all faculty and staff are aware of um, students with disabilities and making sure that campus is more accessible. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.